Hello, I'm Ron, and this DVD I'm doing today is a tribute to an extra special man. His name is Jimmy Keller, and who has passed on to the hereafter since I last visited with him. And I was at his home and visited with him and his wife and his son in the last part of February of this year. Today is the November 24th, 2009. This tribute is going to be very sincere, and from time to time you may catch some tears kind of sliding on down. One of the reasons for that is that not life is always easy, but every once in a while you can run across somebody that makes life a whole lot better. And I wanted Jimmy's family to know of some of the things that I witnessed that, for better words, I would have to say are absolute miracles. And actually, before I met Jimmy, I didn't know miracles existed. Nevertheless, I got to meet Jimmy the first time in some extraordinary situation. And not everyone generally wants to talk about those, but I'll tell you, having never met him or ever heard about him before, I first saw him one night at midnight in a place of restricted liberty. I saw him for the first time, and I'd like to relate that to you. But I'd like to lay a foundation for why I got to a place to meet Jimmy. Terribly unusual circumstances, but you know, every once in a while, a blessing will come from on high. As a farmer, I was able to successfully raise 30 years of crops. And with that, there were certain things that happened in government that weren't fair, they weren't right, and they weren't within the law. And not a lot of people want to stand up for what's right. And I'll have to tell you, I think I got on the government's low list, or shall I say hit list, because I was associated with a group that decided to bring legal action against the employees of the Farmers Home Administration, which is a part of the Department of Agriculture. Because we believed they were unlawfully foreclosing on farmers, and the action was commenced. An insurance company out of Des Moines, Iowa contributed to our success in that venture by furnishing funds for legal counsel. And the reason is policy was being administered out here in the destruction of farmers rather than the law. And we got that case classed. The class action suit got it classed in 45 states of the United States. And we brought it before federal judge Bruce Van Sickle in Bismarck, North Dakota. And in January of 1984, he granted the decision. And the decision was the employees couldn't do that anymore because the law wasn't there that would allow them to foreclose, and so they had to institute the administrative process. Now, when you get off the good list of the government and onto a list that they don't like, you'll find other problems. And I'll tell you, the Native Americans found those problems first. I've read many of the treaties, and they read very good. but the government knew that the natives were not knowledgeable enough in the legal process or profession to be able to obtain their benefits under the treaty that they were supposed to get, that they believed they would get. And so I've come to know that the government will do that not as if you're an Indian at the time, but if they owe you a lot of money and want to find an excuse not to pay, they'll create one out of thin air. And thus the government actually saved itself well over $1.5 million that my wife and I were owed pursuant to government programs. Also, I want to tell you this, because this is the age of the so-called swine flu back again. I want to tell you that my wife got a swine flu shot back in 1976. And I didn't know she was getting it, and she went by a church on the way to work and got the swine flu shot. Shortly thereafter, she was diagnosed as having chronic inflammatory myeloreticuloneuropathy, which is what they called it. My name for it is multiple sclerosis. And in those days, as now, they use treatments to try to slow down the attack on the insulation of the nerves. Because if you shorten out a nerve, the electrical charge doesn't get to the muscle, and the muscle just deteriorates. And next thing you know, you can't even walk because you'll trip and fall, you know, one thing or another. So anyway, she went in, and that's what they determined she had. And so the treatment for that was reduce her immune system so that it would slow the deterioration of the insulation of the nerves. And with her, I lived that even though I didn't have the disease, because I didn't get the swine flu shot. And she was so sincere in doing the follow-through and the process as the medical establishment had dictated it, that there's no reason in the world on her part why it didn't work. It's just that the process has been so subversive that it costs so much money now compared to what it did way back when my father was a young boy. I wouldn't be here talking to you right now if there wasn't a method way back then for the treatment of multiple sclerosis. My dad couldn't get out of bed, he was done for. And my grandfather put him in the back of a Model A Ford pickup with a mattress on it, and he hauled him, and the roads weren't too good way back then. My grandfather hauled my dad to the Mayo Brothers Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota for treatment of multiple sclerosis. And they had a treatment. The Mayo Clinic at that time was not a regulated clinic. They could use whatever they knew worked in the world. They could bring it here and they could use it. And so my dad got a shot for multiple sclerosis. And the shot was typhoid fever that kills multiple sclerosis. I didn't know that until after my wife had died. And you know, here's a picture of my wife right here. In that process of destroying the immune response that they're doing now, and I want you to know that that treatment that my dad got still used in many countries of the world today, and it's a good, inexpensive, cheap fix for multiple sclerosis. And a doctor that operates not very far from me, within 25 miles of me. He said he was a medical doctor in the military, and he said they're using it in many countries of the world today. I said, why aren't they using it here? And he said, well, let's just say they got a process that's not near as good, that costs way more money. And that was the end of what he had to say about it. Anyway, they took my wife's immune system down to where she got big C, otherwise known as cancer. See, now we're starting to get on the realm with Jimmy, because Jimmy ended up having to treat himself after he'd gone through the operation and so forth. And he showed me a picture when he was at St. Jude's International Clinic as the director there, a video. Here's a 30-minute video of not only him on it, but many of the patients that were there. Jimmy later, when I met him, he later told me he had 35,000 people on his computer that he had provided services for, and of course the government raided and took the computer and him. And so, and they didn't even have jurisdiction, they just did it on a long weekend and they grabbed him. But prior to that, I had lived the conventional system of treatment. They didn't have any fix for multiple sclerosis now because they were all under regulation, including the Mayo Clinic. Because I know I went with my wife to the Mayo Clinic. So their process there is the same as it is elsewhere in the country, even though they're more expert at doing the process as it is. It's still not the right one. Anyway, my wife got cancer. And Jimmy's the one that gave me the words for it. Oh, they treated her with the cut, burn, and poison theory of treating cancer. And I said, yeah, that's right. They did. And they give her 4 total separate sets of chemotherapy. Well, some chemotherapies do kill cancer cells. However, they further tear down the immune response. And so even though you reduce the level of cancer in the body, the resistance to it multiplying, and it arithmetically divides those cells, you can't prevent it. It'll come back. And anyway, and then they radiated her. This radiation here, that radiation there. Eventually they radiated her whole head, under her armpit. I'm telling you, it was unbelievable the amount of treatments that she went through. And why did she go through all that effort? Well, she had 3 kids. And she wanted to live long enough to get them situated. Anyway, the government came after me, first statewide, in the state courts, and I was able to prevail pretty well there on any of the false criminal charges. But I want to tell you, our demise started with the government not liking me. Number 2, a dishonest banker setting up a scenario to smoke us. And we had no other choice but to do everything we could do to stand and to exist. And one day a SWAT team came to the yard. And I knew a little bit about the law, not very much at the time, and I asked the head of the SWAT team, which I called Machine Gun Kelly, hey, you're here, yeah. Show me the court order that allows you to be here. You didn't have one. Show me the warrant that allows you to be here. You didn't have one. Show me the writ of execution, which you must have to carry out any order. You didn't have one. Well, I said, if you're here to steal something, show me the bond, because in North Dakota you're required to have twice the value of what it is you're going to steal before you take it. I have to know who the insurer is. I didn't have one. So why were they there? Well, they had miscalculated some, as a matter of law, but also they had miscalculated physically. Why? Because my wife was there, I was there, she was on a walker at the time, And my 3 kids were there, my mother was there, my aunt was there, hired man, hired girl was there, and a fellow who represented himself to me to be a reporter for the National Enquirer was there, and he was taking pictures. Well, what my wife and I didn't know at that time was that this bankster had taken out life insurance policies on our lives without our knowledge, making himself the beneficiary. He actually sold himself the policies. Oh, that's terrible. That's happening around the country today, too. People that have signed documents with financial institutions, you need to have an insurance agent that'll check to see how many liability or life insurance policies are on your life that you don't know about, that the banker has on you, making himself the beneficiary. You need to look at that. They took out life insurance policies on my wife's life when she was not even insurable. They sold them to themselves. We knew nothing about it. And they sold themselves policy on my life. And they sent a SWAT team, a group of machine gunners, to go out and collect. Well, we just had a stroke of luck there, you know. They didn't pull it off that day. But we had another stroke of luck. A friend of mine that was an insurance man came to the mailbox where the 3 members of the SWAT team were there with their AR-15 machine guns and double belts of ammunition, because they knew I was bad. They were told I was bad, and they had to be equipped. And they didn't treat him very well. But none of them knew he was the agent who insured the county for their behavior. That's the judges, the sheriff's department, the county commissioners, you hear me? A county attorney, you name it. They's all insured under that insurance. And you know, the insurance man didn't like what he saw. And so you know what he did? He went to Fargo and actually looked up Bob Rust to see and tell Bob Rust what he saw out there with the SWAT team. And Bob Rust didn't think that the county was worth having insurance, and he wouldn't be in favor of insuring them. And so there was only 2 insurance agents. Remember, we're dealing in North Dakota now, in the state, that could sell that kind of coverage to the counties. 2 days after that event, insurance for Cass County and all of its officials was canceled by the insurance company. I was beat up and hauled away by deputies, and they actually cracked my skull. So I've been officially half cracked ever since. But that's the physical part of it. I learned a lot about the law and the process, and a lot about health and health treatment from Jimmy. And of course, you know, I wouldn't be here if they hadn't treated my dad for multiple sclerosis way back in the early 1900s, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Jimmy. So how do I get to meet Jimmy? I get dismissed from the criminal cases that are brought against me. And basically because it was my right not to help them steal from me. And that section of the code was only a little ways down. But also it wiped the state from coming after me pretty much, and so they had to turn it over to the feds. Now I'm getting closer to meeting Jimmy. And the feds decided one day that they'd come out, and they took a shot at me from 3/4 of a mile away, and they missed me by a foot. I mean, the reason I kind of know the foot level is I was holding this can of gas on up to this auger engine that was running a lot of gas, and the auger was full. It was filling the truck, and I didn't want it to stop, because it's hard to get it started again when it's already full of weight. And so I was putting it on. I was standing on this tire doing that, and a bullet came and hit the auger and dented it. And so I knew I was shot at, so I dropped the can of gas and hit the ground and crawled under the truck. Well, I was successful that day in seeking out those that took a shot at me. And I was arrested in Minnesota, beat unconscious, and hauled away across the line back into North Dakota and put in court, federal court. When that happened, there was 2 different charges brought against me at 2 different times, and both of those got dismissed. Then they decided that they had to do something more severe than that. And so they did bring another case of 3 criminal charges against me, but even after trial, on the day of sentencing, the judge took the decision away from the jury and acquitted me because they had 0 proof I had violated anything. But they'll do that anyway just to try to get you out of circulation if they can. But I want to tell you, I did something stupid. I went halfway through trial on this other case that they brought against me before I realized I was never charged with a single criminal offense. You see, if you got a civil statute in this country, you have to be authorized in the Code of Federal Regulations. If you're a prosecutor, you have to be authorized in the Code of Federal Regulations, and we're talking about Title 26 now, 7206 and 7212, those are not authorized to be charged criminally in this country. Yet they did it, and they give the appearance there was an indictment. Now, all of this relates to Jimmy and Jimmy's case, in that Jimmy was never indicted in fact. Are you hearing me? I want each member of his family to know he was never indicted in fact. So anyway, I end up with court services personnel doing a false information statement for the judge, in which they sign but they never certify as being true and correct. I couldn't get a copy of it because the system would not allow me to have one. When I got to the federal prison in Yankton, and they put me there on no criminal charges. They got to get me out of the country, out of existence as far as the public was concerned. I was able to obtain a copy there because nobody had told the prison officials not to give me a copy. So they gave me a copy. I went through it and corrected it to put everything straight and certified it to be true before a taker of oaths at the federal penitentiary, and entered that into the record there at the penitentiary. I was immediately moved from the place of lower inhabitation to something considerably better. Well, while I was in this considerably better facility, at midnight one night, the door opens. You know, they have doors that make noise. And in comes this gentleman. Well, he looked like a gentleman, you know, chained up. He's handcuffed, chain all the way to his legs. And that was my first sight of Jimmy Keller. And of course, when they got him in the cell area there, they took the cuffs off and the chains and on the ankles and so forth. And so he looked like he'd had probably a couple of days of diesel therapy on a bus. We call it diesel therapy if they truck you from one part of the country to another. And as I understand it, he was trucked from Brownsville, Texas to Yankton, South Dakota, plus their other maneuvers of getting there. And he looked kind of like death warmed over. And I had just changed sheets on the bed, and so I said, sir, here, take this bottom bunk. Because I said, I just changed sheets on it. I said, I'll take the top bunk. Well, no. The fellow I come to know as Jimmy said, no, 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 he wasn't going to do that. No, 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 you keep the bottom bunk, I'll take the top bunk, he said. Well, I want to tell you, 3 times while I was on the bottom bunk, Jimmy fell down from the top bunk. 3 times. And he hit the cement floor. There's nothing harder than marbled cement. And the 3rd time I said, Jimmy, why don't you let me take the top bunk now? You take the bottom bunk, that way you don't have so far to fall. Because you see, you all have to get up in the middle of the night for head count. And Jimmy would come, bang, right on the cement floor. I said, Jimmy, you're going to break something. Well, yeah, he says, it does hurt. You know. But I want to tell you, when I first saw Jimmy, you know, I thought his glasses were broken, because this is the way they were. I didn't know anything else until he showed me that he had had radical surgery on this side of his face through the conventional system, and they'd taken out, you know, on the shoulder and glands and all kinds of things, and told him that you know, he had a pretty good chance of being free of cancer but they had to go farther than they thought they were going to have to. But because he's been disfigured, you know, that was the price to pay for getting rid of cancer. Well, then he tells me that 2 months later, cancer is back in the back of his neck. And he wasn't going to go through any more of that treatment. And so he decided that he wasn't going. And his mother and dad made some arrangements for him in the state of Texas. And he decided to go there and to do the follow-through that way. Well, after seeing what they did to my wife, destroying her step at a time, at a tremendous cost, by the way, I decided, now, if I ever get big C, I'm not going through the conventional system for treatment. I'm going to go to a scam artist, if nothing else, rather than go to those that are wearing all of the credentials that are pulling the scam extraordinaire. I just as soon then deal with a crook. And while I was in the federal pen, I had cancer, and I knew I had it. And Jimmy knew enough about cancer to know that I had it without taking any blood tests, without taking any exams. He knew it, and I knew it. And that was, you know, we're dealing on over 5 years after my wife had moved on to the hereafter. Anyway, and in my case, I'm sure the sponsor of it was stress and not a proper diet. I mean, I wasn't even close to a proper diet. And I didn't know what else to do about cancer, because I knew everything my wife did just took her down one peg after another. And it's Jimmy that gave me the words cut, burn, and poison. Treatment of cancer. Okay, I got to be pretty decent friends with Jimmy, and I want to tell you, he would do about anything to help people. And he told me about what I'd need to do if I was to control it and to eventually get rid of it. And I believed him. I mean, he was certainly in an area, in a spot where, what good would it do him to misinform? It wouldn't do him any good. But nevertheless, he was the kind of guy that didn't lie to you. He told you the truth. And anyway, I said, Jimmy, I have a sincere belief that you were never indicted in fact in your case. And Jimmy says, oh, Ron, I was indicted, no question about it. I said, Jimmy, indicted in fact. I don't think Jimmy exactly knew at that time what fact meant. Nobody can lie to a grand jury to get probable cause to charge you criminally. Well, one day he says, well, how would I prove that I was never indicted in fact? I said, let me see a copy of your indictment. Well, he says, I don't have one. I said, Jimmy, get one. They'll have one here. The lady over here, Buthner or whatever her name was, she'll have it. Get it. He got it, and I looked at it, and I said, Jimmy, I'm not an expert in the law, but I don't believe you were ever indicted in fact. Well, he said, I was. Here it is. Yeah, I said, it's signed by the chairman of the grand jury, and it's signed by the useless attorney, or otherwise U.S. attorney. I said, you got that. But I said, you're not the kind of guy that goes out and commits a crime. So I said, I don't think you were indicted in fact. Well, he said, what would I do to prove that? And I said, write the clerk of court. You know where the clerk is? Yeah. You know the clerk's address? Yeah. Write her. It's a lady, right? Yeah, it's a lady. Write her and ask her for a copy of the grand jury transcript. He does. It's a one-paragraph thing, you know. And the prison furnished the envelope and the stamp. Out it went. He gets back about a week later, an order signed by the judge denying him access to the grand jury transcript. And of course he has a right of that, to have that under Rule 16 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, Title 18, 3500, known as the Jinx Act. He has a right to it under that, and he has a right to it under the Brady Act, Brady versus Maryland. So he said, well, the judge denied me. I said, there's a reason for that, Jimmy. I know now you were never indicted in fact. Yeah, but how are we going to prove that? I said, you're going to appeal his decision because he was dumb enough to sign it. The judge was. You appeal it now to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and you appeal it expedited, ex parte. And you want them to order the district judge to order that transcript prepared and get it to you. Because Jimmy already had the trial transcript sitting right there. I mean, it was a big transcript. And so Jimmy, he does it. And to my surprise, the Fifth Circuit ordered the district court judge in Brownsville, Texas, to order that transcript prepared and delivered to Jimmy right away at the federal prison in Yankton, South Dakota. I said, boy, that Jimmy, he's got luck, you know. Man, it's midnight after he gets the transcript. It's the midnight. Again, that's when I first met Jimmy, was at midnight. Now it's at midnight. Jimmy Keller comes on court. You ain't going to believe what he found for evidence. Here he has the trial transcript that showed who testified for him. About 20 witnesses testified for him at trial. Here, in the grand jury transcript, the U.S. attorneys furnished death certificates to the grand jury to prove that these people died that Jimmy helped. Yeah. But in the trial transcript, they were alive 9 years after they were dead and appeared physically and testified for him. So I can tell you, his wife, and his sons, Jimmy was never indicted in fact. So he was never indicted. And Jimmy needed to get to the outside as fast as possible. Jimmy worked closely with a veterinarian that was there from Niobrara, Nebraska, which was having the same problems I was having. No criminal charges against him. And he helped Jimmy prepare a petition for habeas corpus to be delivered through the mail to Judge Jones at Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I said, Jimmy, your chances of winning on a petition for habeas corpus before Judge Jones is slim to none, and Slim left town. Well, he said, what can it hurt? I said, it can't hurt anything. And I said, every day you're incarcerated, if there's a violation of your due process rights, you have a right to petition for habeas, to bring the body forth to testify. Well, Jimmy put that out in the mail. It took a little while, but Jimmy was released from the facility on habeas corpus. And the reason was the administration at that federal facility could not read and properly interpolate the judgment. And Jimmy had a right to know exactly what day and what hour he would be leaving the facility with his sentence totally served. He had a right to know, and he was denied that right, and that's what they appealed on. It's got to have been the first time that Judge Jones ever granted a petition for habeas corpus. Another blessing. You hear me? I couldn't understand why, because he'd never granted anybody's at any time, but he granted Jimmy's. So Jimmy ends up getting back home to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He no more than gets there. And a lady that he knows brings another lady with her that the medical system has written off and has said, go on home and get your affairs in order. We'll try to keep you free of pain the best we can, I know, for the days you have left. There's nothing more we can do with you. And of course this lady, Jimmy's never seen before, shows up for treatment. And Jimmy had signed a probation agreement. He had signed one before I had ever met him. And so they could violate that contract if he didn't follow it and put him back in the can. Well, Jimmy, as good-hearted as he is and as honest as he is, he just couldn't refuse to treat the lady, and he did. And she prevailed. It wasn't until a whole year after that that we figured out exactly what had happened. The U.S. attorney, who knew his wife was dying of cancer, had not objected to Jimmy's petition for habeas corpus. That's why Judge Jones granted it. There was no opposition to it from the territory, the state wherein Jimmy would be going as soon as he's released from the federal pen. You hear me? And I said, Jimmy, when I got to see him afterwards, I said, Jimmy, you got the best insurance of any person who calls themselves a doctor, and you don't call yourself one. Because when you treat folks, man, if they don't live, you get to go to jail for the rest of your life. There's no better insurance than that. And Jimmy, he breaks out laughing, you know. Yeah, that really happened. But I want to tell you this, that Jimmy started helping me as soon as I got to know him and he got to know me. Are you hearing me? Right there in the federal pen. And I got to tell you this one because it is so cute. Because I had not signed in anywhere in that facility, in other words, they just trucked me there, dumped me off, and assumed I would be signing to this and signing to that, and I signed nothing, you know. Because I come to know that this instrument that I have in my pocket here is the most dangerous instrument known to man, and you don't sign their shit. I mean, I use those words. You don't sign their shit because it's against you. It's giving them permission. And I got out of there early on account of it because they couldn't collect from the taxpayers for my keep, because they had no proof I was there, which is my signature. The system don't trust them, they trust the inmates who sign. Anyway, I was so bad off when I got there, digestive process and so forth, that Tagamet was not even putting a dent in the heartburn anymore. And so Jimmy says, well, he said, there's a fix for that. Oh, I said, there is? Yeah, he said, we'll look at starting that tonight. Oh, okay. So Jimmy, he had signed into everything, you know. So he got to go to commissary to buy. And he came back from commissary with a bottle of Louisiana hot sauce. I mean, it was clear right on the face of it. I mean, it was Louisiana hot sauce. Make no mistake about it. And Jimmy goes over to the toilet and empties it in the toilet and flushes it. You know, that strikes me as a little strange, you know. But that facility would not allow this most precious item known to man when it comes to heartburn, would not allow that to be used or in possession, let's put it this way, not in possession of inmates. And that's what's in this famous bottle right here, Tabasco sauce. So Jimmy took a job as fourth string mopper in the kitchen at the penitentiary. You know, whatever needed to be picked up, cleaned up, or whatever he did. And not even in a high rank, in about the lowest rank they got. And guess what? This material that's in this bottle that you can't have in your possession, well, when it's in a Louisiana hot sauce bottle, nobody ever checks by taking a swig of it to see if it's the right stuff or not. And so he had trucked Tabasco sauce into the cell block. And he made a hot soup. Now I'm going to tell you, that soup was so hot that the top of my head sweat. Are you hearing me? It sweat so profusely that I thought I was standing under a shower. It was that. I never, ever had anything so hot in my life. And I said, Jimmy, why? Why this? He says, the problem is you've been encouraging with antacids your heartburn. And it's the H. pylori that has to be killed. You don't kill it, you're going to end up with stomach cancer, colon cancer, and intestinal cancer, all three, besides what you already got on your back. So every night, Jimmy made me a hot soup, and I'll tell you, we never ran out of Tabasco sauce. And I'll tell you, every day, and by the way, I couldn't take any more antacids because he gave me the instruction, no more antacids, you'll just slow down the success. So I believed him. And I want to tell you, I take a little of this every week because I like it. I like the taste and everything. I had to learn that. Jimmy taught me. And I ain't never had heartburn since. He said if you don't get your digestive system in shape, Ricky, and start watching what you eat to eat the stuff you need to eat, and he told me where those things were too. He says you're not going to buy yourself any time. And you got to have time to get out of here. You got to have time to learn how to treat it. Because you got to get rid of it. Then it was Jimmy that gave me the information on compound X, black X. And he said on those surface tumors, he says you can kill them as soon as you get out of here if you can get some black X. And he gave me a place where I could get it. And I thought I could get it sooner than that because I had gotten the sneaking suspicion this friend of mine in Texas knew about it and probably had some and could ship it at least to home, not to the pen. And it did. So I got it. And Jimmy told me exactly how to use it. And Jimmy, his calendar for tumors coming off was right to the date. 10 days. One speck. Keep the aloe vera on it. And on the dressing on, so that it stays in the aloe vera. And I'll tell you, the body separated from every one of those and they came off. My son took the first one off. And he almost passed out taking it off because he was the only one there on the 10th day. And it never bled a drop of blood. The root was with it. And he said, "What do I do with it, Dad?" And I said, "Get a Ziploc bag and put it in there." And he ran upstairs to the kitchen and got a Ziploc bag and put it in there and came down. He said, "What do I do with it now?" I said, "Put it in the deep freeze." He said, "You don't want tumors in the deep freeze." I said, "It'll be froze before you can hardly turn around." So he did that. Then my son took it to school one day for show and tell, to show the teacher and the other kids at the class the tumor that he took off of Dad's back. And he said, "I'll tell you, Dad," he said, "the kids were really interested in that because they'd never seen it before and they wanted to know how I did it." But he said the teacher, if she'd had false teeth, she'd have lost them on the floor because she was so, couldn't believe it, you know. Jimmy told me all about the cancer serum, the regular serum and the hot serum. He told me about a number of other things. And I'll just, I'm going to keep the cap off now out of show my affection for Jimmy. He told me what causes cancer: depleted immune system, short of trypsin and chymotrypsin, the stuff that allows the immune response to penetrate the protective layer the cancer cell sets up. L-arginine. I take it every day. I've been a long time free of it now. You hear me? Been a long time free of it. 18 years. Kind of like that, It's not very expensive either. Actually, it was Jimmy Keller that gave me the telephone number to reach one of the people that's on this tape, Dr. Keller's tape. Now, I know Jimmy Keller wasn't a doctor, he was a director. But I'm telling you, he surpasses all doctors I've ever met. So, I got this as soon as I got out of there, and I had to figure out the quickest way to get out of there, and I did. After I was there 180 days, the last day of the 180 days, the prison ran short of money. So they had to take the cup around to the hacks that worked there and get them to put cash in there so they could go down to the store, a grocery store, and buy breakfast cereal for the inmates. And that had never happened to them before, that they'd ever run out of money. Well, there was two causes for that running out of money. Number one, there was one guy they weren't able to collect from the taxpayers for because they had no name on him. He signed no worksheets, he didn't sign in, he didn't sign for property, he didn't sign any safety reports, he signed nothing. What's it about? Nothing you don't understand. There was nothing. So, of course, they couldn't collect from my keep. Well, the whole system at that time, pursuant to the law library, it cost the whole system in this country, from top through the prison system, $560 a day per inmate. Well, that's a lot of money. That's way back then, in the early 1990s. Hear me? Well, anyway, so they weren't collecting for me. Well, that shortchanged them some. But also there were several people leaving there that would request the grand jury transcript, and when the clerk would write back and say there ain't one, under Title 28 of the United States Code, they're required to have it. And when they write somebody and say they don't have one, then you write back for the grand jury concurrence form signed for at least 12 grand jurors voting to indict. Now we all know there's supposed to be 24 grand jurors, but not all of them appear. But I'm telling you, there has to be not less than 12 that sign the concurrence form voting for probable cause that he be charged. Well, when they didn't have that, you could class in 2 days of mailing to the clerk of court, 2 days of Bureau of Prisons processing. Are you hearing me? 2 days of Bureau of Prisons processing, and on the next day, if it wasn't a Saturday or a Sunday, at 9 o'clock in the morning, they'd be out of the prison because they were never charged in fact. That's why. They were never indicted. Jimmy had a grand jury, but the grand jury was lied to with false certificates of death. We all know you can't have been dead 10 years ago, or 9 years ago, excuse me, and then show up in court and testify. Because those miracles are awful hard to convince anybody of. And so there was no question about what they falsified the evidence for the indictment. Jimmy never hurt anybody. Jimmy also told me about CoQ10, keep the pipes clean. He said, Ron, gotta keep the pipes clean. So you take some every day. It'll clean them up and keep them clean. Then because you're taking L-arginine, just a little bit of potassium each day. Yeah. And then because the system didn't like me very well, they had over-tightened the handcuffs all the time, and I ended up with carpal tunnel. Well, Jimmy had a fix for that. B6, carpal tunnel. The telephone number that he gave me was for Bonnie Care in California. And a friend of mine got a hold of her, and with the information that she gave this friend of mine got set up with the Now company just out of the outskirts of Chicago and got to be a dealer for these products. They're top class, high quality products. That doesn't mean there are others out in the market that aren't. I'm just telling you these are good, and Jimmy recommended them. These. Because he said they're always high quality, not just sometimes. And so that, you know, everything Jimmy said, we believed. With these, when I got to the federal pen, there was 458 inmates there. That included me when I got there. And when the second quarter was over with that I was there, in other words, a total of 180 days, there was 422. Now it took the Bureau of Prisons there, the prison management there, a month and a half to determine that one of the reasons why they ran short of money was because of this one inmate that had signed nothing, and they hadn't collected a penny for me from the taxpayers. Now, after 120 days of entry of judgment, the warden or the superintendent of the facility determines how long you stay. Not the judge's sentence, because the court loses jurisdiction after 120 days. One morning, they come to get me. They rolled in a cart, ordered me to put and they used the word, put your shit on the cart. And so I put whatever I had there on the cart. Follow me. They led me out to the main office. Took me up to this cage at the main office. And this guy tells this lady who I am, and she starts cutting out the money for pay. Well, I never signed any pay sheet, so I wasn't entitled to any pay. And when she gets it counted out, she slips the slip to me and says, sign here. And I said, you got to be kidding me. It's your hard taxpayer dollars. that was spent for a public defender for me. And he told me in no uncertain terms, don't sign anything he don't approve of. Now, did you get clearance from him for me to sign this? She grabbed the money and she said, get him out of here. They took me out to the street. You hear me? Right in the middle of Yankton, South Dakota. And the Bureau of Prisons had made a deal with the city of Yankton to let no prisoner out within the city limits. None. Oh, well, government follows its agreements when and if it feels like it. They threw me right out in the middle of the street, dumped my stuff right in the middle of the street, and threatened me. They said, Mr. Brickey, if you come back onto prison property, we're going to charge you with criminal trespass. I said to myself, what a waste of words. So I went and hid my stuff in bushes and ran to an attorney's, through the, the alleyways and so forth, into the attorney's office. And I thought I better sit there till the streets cool off, because the superintendent may realize that I was dumped off in the city in violation of the agreement. Charlie Crandall was his name. And he was radio man third class on the Pueblo. And if you have study about past history and wars and police actions and so forth, you'll find that Charlie Crandall didn't get the job done of destroying all the evidence before the ship was boarded and taken, and he was incarcerated. Nevertheless, Charlie Crandall was not a bad guy. But he didn't get that job done either, and now he's in charge of this prison. And he had an assistant, and it was so funny. Nobody in the place could ever get his name straight, the assistant that was. His name was either Dick Stiff or Stiff Dick, but nobody ever got it right. It was one way one day and the other way the next day. Anyway, it was a classic crew there. It was like living Hogan's Heroes again. Are you hearing me? Like being there with the management. About a third of the intelligence of the inmates, in all honesty. But there was nobody that surpassed Jimmy Keller when it come to fighting legal or medical problems. He was top. And I arranged for Jimmy Keller to speak at Toastmasters once a week. There was a short period of time you could go to the chapel in the prison and participate in Toastmasters if you want. And I set Jimmy up to speak at Toastmasters and engineered it so that 2 different doctors that were in the federal pen would rate his speech. Well, now, Jimmy wasn't a great speaker, but the content of his speech was so unbelievable to the general public. But these 2 doctors knew he was absolutely correct. And he got the highest rating for the speech. And so he got the 6-pack of pop. But I wanted him to tell it to a group. Why? Because that's important. Not just me. Group. Yeah, and he did a beautiful job of they all dwelled totally on the content, not on the caliber of the speech, the content. So I knew what they were looking for was interesting stuff, and boy, did they get it. So anyway, Jimmy did that. Now, for the family, I want you to know that a friend of mine had a 28-foot RV, and I call it the bus. And there were so many people that I knew that needed help on cancer that I put out the word. The bus is leaving Fargo at 12 noon on Tuesday. If you're there, you get to be on the bus, even if we got to carry you onto the bus. if you're there. And when the bus filled up, at 12 o'clock, it headed out. And it headed out, and none of those people in that bus knew where they were going. But every one of them had been sent home saying, there's nothing more we can do for you. Some of these people were from Canada. There's nothing more we can do for you. Go home. Try to get your affairs in order. We'll try to keep you as comfortable as we can for as long as we can. In other words, they were all short-timers. I want to tell you, some of them were in such bad shape, even on the first bus. Not the second and the third and the fourth. I'm talking about the first bus even. I wasn't so sure those people would live long enough to get to where I knew where we were going, which was Baton Rouge. They didn't know. They knew where they were when they got there, but they didn't know till then. I couldn't even let them talk on the telephone. They couldn't. I had to be under wraps all the time because we didn't want to bring trouble to our friend Jimmy. But I want to tell you, just the fact of hope kept even the dying from dying. They all lived to get there. Two of them, just two of the whole bunch, didn't make it. One didn't listen to Jimmy Keller. Jimmy Keller says, look, you've had so much chemotherapy, it's going to take you at least 2 years to repair your liver from the processing of those chemicals before you could ever take any more chemotherapy. Otherwise, it'll shut down your liver and you'll die. You'll actually drown. One fella by the name of Brad didn't listen. He went back, and by the way, we were all instructed by Jimmy to go back and check with the medical facility for retesting to see if we had any more cancer, and to get the test, copy of the results, so that the individual knew. It wasn't Jimmy telling them they were going to be without cancer. The conventional system, their job was to tell them whether they had it or didn't have it. And Brad went and got a full body scan. Nothing. They first thought they got the body scan results mixed up with somebody else's. Then next, they discovered there was no mix-up in it. That obviously it was a case of spontaneous remission. Yeah. Spontaneous, all right. And none of these people would tell any of the doctors where they had been and what they did, because they knew how important it was to keep Jimmy going. You had to keep your mouth shut about certain things. And Jimmy, we wanted to see to it Jimmy kept helping people. And we try to help people ourselves, but we wanted to be sure he could. And so he had a tremendous amount of respect for everyone that was there. Back to Brad. They couldn't find it anywhere. Tests showed completely negative. And the doctors convinced him, just in case there's just a few cancer cells left somewhere we can't detect, why don't you go for another round of chemotherapy? And Brad forgot that Jimmy said, you will take no more chemotherapy for at least 2 years. Brad had liver shut down and he died. This is another thing that Jimmy taught me that was so important to people, and there's so many people need to know today. Radiation. Sure, you don't feel a thing when you're being radiated. In this country, they're not keeping track of the amount of rads of radiation you get. And that's area times length of time times the volume, which represents the volume. Area times the amount of times and the amount of time that you're taking each time. Okay? A lady comes from Prince George, British Columbia, and she brings her medical records with her, and guess what's on it? The doctors in Canada are keeping track of the amount of radiation you get. And I want to tell you, she has to be, helped into the, she's a relatively young lady. She has to be helped into the bus. And her husband is with her, to try to facilitate her until she can get help. Try to do what he can to see to it she takes her medicine and so on and so forth. I thought she was pretty far gone. I wasn't sure she was going to last until I got there, but nevertheless, hope got her there. She sits down with Jimmy and hands him the records, and right on the front of it, 2,000 rads. Jimmy had told me, if you get 500 rads of radiation, you're going to die from the radiation. Don't worry, you're not going to die from anything else. You're going to die from the radiation. 500 rads will kill you. Romana had 2,000 rads. Jimmy told him what the radiation would do to her. You talk about a lady that turned angry because her doctors hadn't told her. Jimmy said, 500 rads will kill you. He said, all of the goodness I'm going to try to do here to help you can't save your life now. But all I can do to help you is I can buy you more time so you can be with your little son longer than you would normally be. Well, Jimmy bought her just a speck over 2 years. And she was done for when she got in the bus. You should have seen her when she left the treatment center. She was happy. She was without pain. She was playing cards, fully doing all the maneuvering and stuff herself without any help. And she took a bunch of extra cancer serum with her because she was going to have to keep up on the treatment to buy some additional time. Not from cancer, but because of the goodness that was in the serum itself, would buy her time over and above where death should have entered. So those were the two. The rest made it. I want to tell you, it is unreal what I saw for turnaround. Now I realize that for you members of the family that there was many of events that, because I know you weren't there, so you wouldn't have been able to see them firsthand. But I want to tell you, one night at midnight, now Jimmy, he worked hard all day long. It was just like there was no end to it. And at midnight, there's a bang on the door, and a guy with a white uniform on comes backing in, dragging a lady. Well, we find out the lady is his wife. The doctors in the hospital told him that very likely his wife would not make it till morning. So he takes her out of the hospital at midnight. Well, he took her out at 11 o'clock, and it took him an hour to get to the underground clinic, which was in, that had to be changed, every so often. It had to be a different place for security purposes. And this night it was in the dining room of a saloon keeper's home. And there's a bang on the door, and in this guy comes, dragging this lady was his wife. She's not cognizant anymore. She's passed on to not being knowledgeable of even what's going on. And he wants Jimmy to help her. And he's an orderly at the hospital where his wife was not supposed to make it till morning. Well, at 4 o'clock in the morning, she's cognizant. She's hobbling out of there on her own power. Now this is 4 o'clock in the morning. And she does hobble all the way to the car, although he's guiding her to be sure she doesn't fall or anything, And she's to come back that afternoon. So she's to come back 12 hours later. But I remember this. Jimmy says, now will you get her straight home? Not to the hospital, but straight home, and get the hot blanket on her, the electric blanket on her. Turn her on high and throw as many blankets as you got on top of that, because she's going to go through an ice box. Colder than the North Pole with a 70-mile-an-hour wind at 70 below. Oh, yeah, he said he did that. She was back. She was walking herself when she came back at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. She was bent over yet, but she was walking on her own and coming in for treatment. Now, if you click the calendar to the third day, we were leaving that day, so it's the last day I got to see her for a while. She drove herself to the clinic. She brought her kids with her and her housekeeper with her. She had been to the beauty salon that morning, and she was totally erect. She was like a beauty star. Perfectly cognizant. She just came for a follow-up treatment. Total elapsed time, 2.5 days. Now, that's a miracle. When I went to Sunday school and to church and the minister class lessons and so forth, I knew that there had been, at least from the Bibles say so, that there had been blessings in the past, that there had been miracles. I got to see so many there. And I'm sorry I'm in tears, but it shakes you up when you see so many miracles. One was mine. I got the treatment to finish up the cancer from Jimmy. And Jimmy gave me something else that is so extraordinary. He gave me regeneration vertebrae to rebuild the vertebrae from the damage the cancer had caused. 2 shots. He just gave me the material and he said, Bricky, you've taken care of enough cattle. Put it in the vein. Well, the only one I could hit was this one right here, because if you wrapped a tightener around here, it would pop up some and I could stick the needle in there and get it in the vein. No leaks, in the vein. Put a little piece of tape over it. And I gave myself the shot of regeneration vertebrae, a 5 milliliter. Pop the cap and fill the syringe and put it in. And so I got 2 shots. And in 6 months, I didn't have vertebrae damage anymore. I thought that's a pretty good fix. There's one other one I got to tell you about because it's so dramatic. A fellow came we had the clinic that week at the haymount of a barn. It was cleaned up, but there it was the hay-mound of a barn, and the steps were outside, and so we had to climb up, get in the front door, right at the level of the hay-mount of the barn. And Jimmy was terribly busy. The place is full, and I called her Nurse Cole. She was loading syringes, and she was just a lady from Canada. She was a lady there, married to a farmer, and she was scared to death of needles. She'd almost pass out if she saw one, but she was loading syringes because she could see what was going on. I'm here to tell you, Jimmy was right. When you get to know, either by the system or on your own, that you have cancer, it crosses into the subconscious. And the subconscious, like Jimmy said, starts putting you on the scenario of dying. And if you can't get that conveyance that you're not going to die, from what you see and what you feel, and back across that line, the subconscious system doesn't stop dying. If you can get it across there, it starts going the other way. You're going to live. You're going to make it. And I'm here to tell you, the bodily functions start improving. That's important to your longevity, that the body functions. And what Jimmy was doing as far as treating was concerned, it was so effective, it was so unbelievable. You had to see it. Because it's easier for you to see when it's happening to others that you haven't even met before. And the improvements. And listening to them. And how they're so in pain one day, and then just a few hours, they're out of pain. Don't feel any anymore. And Jimmy would say, and you don't take no more pain pills, you hear? No more. It was that conveyance of others that people hadn't even met before that would get that cross the threshold into the subconscious. And I mean, there's no question about it. When I hauled the bus home, it's altogether different. Everybody was in beautiful feeling of health. I mean, that rattles you now. I mean, it does. Oh, do you enjoy it? Yes. But one more. This fellow came, he barely made it up all the steps outside into the haymound. And there was something completely different about his speech. Although his words were very clear, I have a voice box yet. And so you're hearing from my voice box. When he talked, you heard from his voice box too. But he'd already had radical surgery. And they took out his voice box, the one that he was born with, along with all kinds of other stuff. The shoulder, and I mean, they made a mess of him. And he had gone to Radio Shack and bought odds and ends and pieces of stuff, and he made a voice box for himself. I never had the time to converse with him to see how he made it work so well. You can hear me, you could hear him if he was giving you the same words even clearer than hearing me. It was that good. But also, here, on this side of his neck, was this huge tumor. And the medical system had told him that there was nothing more they could do with that because that was wrapped around the jugular vein. It was a part of the jugular vein. And that he was to go home and get his affairs in order. They'd try to keep the pain levels down for him. But there's nothing more they could do. They couldn't operate on that. They either couldn't or wouldn't. And so here he appears with this. And of course Jimmy's very busy, and he wanted to know, if Jimmy was around. And Jimmy's busy, you know, he just got done sinking a needle, you know. And Jimmy looks up and says, yeah, I'm here. How long would it be before you could converse with me or talk to me? And Jimmy knew something was different about it, but you could hear every word he said. And Jimmy said, oh, about 15 minutes. Okay. He said, I'll just leave my car run then. He left his car running way down at the bottom of the steps. And so Jimmy was about right on the minute, 15 minutes of sitting down right by this table, you know, nice round table. And he said, they told me to go home. They said there's nothing more they can do with me. And he said this is, you know, this is awful big. And he said he was concerned about his shutting off, even reducing the blood supply to his brain. And yeah, and they talked a little bit, and next thing I know, Jimmy gives me these 2 fingers. So I load a syringe, 60 cc syringe with 20 cc's of hot serum and 40 cc's of lactated ringer. Shake it, hand it to him. Jimmy sinks the needle and starts leaning slowly on the syringe because the fellow says he got nothing to lose. He's going to go for the treatment whether it works or whether it don't work. He's going to go because there's nothing more the system will do for him. And so they're visiting, you know, like 2 gentlemen visit, and I get the fingers again. So I load another syringe. I mean, that's the least I can do is try to help. And Jimmy no more and gets the second syringe. Now we're dealing in, you know, 20 cc's of serum's already in the man. Another 20 fixing. You know what? And he starts leaning on the syringe just a little bit. And the man says, he said, what's going on? And Jimmy says, what? What's going on? Jimmy says, well, tell me. He says, my neck is wet. Jimmy says, are you sure your neck is wet? Yeah, he said it's wet. Jimmy says, are you sure? He puts his hand up there because he's getting his treatment right here. He says, no, it's not wet. He looks at his hand and there's no moisture on it. You know, it's not wet. Well, Jimmy said, you ever seen these video games? You can go play them, you know, put a quarter in the slot and the Pac-Man games. He said, would you think it feels a lot like Pac-Man? Guy said, I've never felt that before. But that's a good explanation, Pac-Man. I get the fingers again. Now we're dealing in 60 cc syringe. I mean, total of 60 cc's. I got it mixed. He pops the syringe, puts the next one on. They keep on talking. I'm telling you, one can start to detect that the tumor is shrinking. I get the fingers again from Jimmy. 2, that's 20 cc's of hot serum. We're now beyond the limit. Wherever I've been there, Jimmy has never treated anybody with that much. Got 80 cc's now of hot serum. 100 cc's of hot serum. I never seen anything like that before. And that tumor's shrinking. And the last instruction was not the 2 fingers. He didn't give them to me. He said 15 cc's more. So I load the syringe with 15 and then 45 cc's of lactated ringer. Hand it to him. When he's done with that, that's 115 cc's of hot serum. The man gets up, you know, he's got a pad on here. just a little piece of cotton on here. The man gets up and says, I feel really good. And goes on out. And Jimmy says, get home, get to bed, put the hot electric blanket on high, and put all the blankets you can find on top of that, because you're fixing to go through the deep freeze. And the guy believed Jimmy. Jimmy only had to tell him once. He believed him. And come back tomorrow. We got to do follow-up. Now I have 6 witnesses to the fact that in 30 minutes of total time, that tumor shrank to only a little bit of flabby skin. In 30 minutes. Now that's a miracle. I saw it. You see, a lot of the interior stuff, you can just look at the people smile and how they feel and how they talk. This one, you could see it, physically see it. I'm telling you. The things I learned from Jimmy are just unbelievable. If you haven't been there and you didn't see it, it would be hard for you to believe it. Everybody that I talk to that's been there holds Jimmy in the highest regard. Back to this. My wife, at the beginning, when they determined she had cancer, a fellow that I knew came over one day and he said, I recommend you go to Tijuana. I said, why? Take your wife to Tijuana. They got some real treatment down there for cancer. Guess who was there at the time? Jimmy Keller was there at the time. Yeah, running St. Jude's International Clinic with a full schedule. Then the fellow that I knew even said he would pay the cost if I didn't have the money. I'd never heard about Tijuana. I'd never heard about the clinics in Tijuana. And of course, which one he ran, St. Jude's International. I screwed up. I didn't go. They radiated my wife to death. I want to tell you about what Jimmy's the one that told me about 500 rads of radiation. And now, like Paul Harvey would say when he was alive, and now for the rest of the story. I inadvertently ended up in Dallas, Texas one day at Preston Center, where there was a facility there of what I would call renegade doctors. Renegade. And that they did their own thing. They just did it. And they had been around a while. And guess who was there? You ever heard of the Manhattan Project? The project wherein this government funded the creation of the atom bomb? It was the Manhattan Project. And Ed Tiller, the physicist, was there in Preston Center, Dallas, Texas, and I believe he was 90 years old. I got to meet him. And guess what he told me? You get 500 rads of radiation, the radiation will kill you. Make no mistake about it. You see, Jimmy had the correct information. I don't know how he got all his information, but what he put out was truthful. It was absolutely, totally truthful and believable when you saw it. We have some health problems in this country second to none. And only us that are still alive can help. I want to thank Louise and Jimmy's oldest brother for visiting with me and helping me when I stopped by at the end of February to see Jimmy. He even took me to a place to get auto parts. I thank you so much for that. And you helped me, fix this wheel with the proper brakes and brake discs so I could get back home. I went from there to Texas to make the arrangements for Jimmy, and I did the best I could, and I got it set up. But I was, they call it day late and a dollar short. I'm sorry about that, because I could have probably worked harder and re-engineered it so they appeared at your home to help, because they have a record of turning a lot of serious health problems that have to do with mentally turned around. I even got a call from a doctor today in South Texas, having tremendous luck with those people that are young folks that are totally on wheelchair, out of being able to be anything like a productive people, able to get up from there and walk and come back and understand and act mentally like a human being. Some of these things we need to implement. We need to implement. And so, working at it, I want you to know that a tribe up here, the Roseau Red River tribe, they offered to furnish Jimmy their clinic for treatment of people just across the border into Canada to treat there. I'm not sure they'd have sufficient police protection to protect him there. Although they had their own police, the problem with them is they were trained by the Canadian authorities. So they would probably enforce the protection of the very expensive medicine system that exists in this country. I want any doctor that hears this tape to know that doctors do lots of things that are of value to people. There's no question about that. But these major diseases, they have locked themselves out and into clear profit rather than conveying what needs to be done to fix the problem and keep these people productive. Now that's a factor in our economic problems in this country. Is cost for needless treatment is one, but also the shortening of the life of people. I've seen people live a lot longer with no treatment for cancer than those that have been constantly treated by them. And here where I live, there's some people that have died within 4 days of taking a chemotherapy shot from the chemotherapy. Come on. Those systems are no good. We can eradicate multiple sclerosis in this country, and we can eradicate cancer cheaply, very well. We can repair over 240 parts of the body by injection of RNA, DNA that comes from afterbirths of humans and cows. And if you think I'm kidding you, get on the web and look up Regeneration, all E's, the Regeneration Company, and look up RN13. That's extracted from the afterbirth of cows. I saw people use it there in Baton Rouge. Another one. There's a good chemical for cleaning out pipes really fast from South America. Jimmy was receiving it because of Roman Catholic priests would come from down there and bring it up because the country wouldn't allow it to be exported. But they would come to this country, make it available, leave it here, and Jimmy would use it. And I took a fella down there that his legs and his feet were so swollen, it was absolutely the word gruesome applied. Just gruesome. He couldn't even find any socks anywhere big enough to put on. Couldn't wear pants, only shorts. He got the South American product, and in 5 days, everything was back to normal. In 5 days. Plus, he looked 10 years younger. And guess what? I kept one of the empty containers of it. And the product is called Socanar. Cleans up pipes, I'm telling you, right now. So I was there. And guess what? He got that in the muscle. You know the big one that you sit on? That's where that one goes. Yeah. As a matter of fact, one day he said, you know, this smarts a little bit, Ron. Tap me there, will ya? I got to tap him on the seat while he was getting the shot. I mean, I'll tell you, Jimmy was hip. Way beyond belief. You had to see it to know it. For all the people Jimmy has saved, and the risks that he took trying to help people, I not only thank him, but I thank his family. Because with that kind of adversity, resisting good, clean help like Jimmy gave, they had to feel the pain and the suffering too of the unlawful things that happened to Jimmy. But I want to thank you for your hospitality again. And I was on my way back from spending 20 days in Florida investigating the unlawful taking of homes, which is phenomenal in nature, and I've done a video on that, or DVD on that. It's about ready to be put out now. And I want you to know that it was so nice to be in it. It was so nice to see Jimmy again. I'll also tell you this. When and if Jimmy comes before the Supreme Judge, he'll be first in line. Yep. Because he's got all these votes here on earth saying he's top notch, he's first class, he's decent, and he deserves eternity. I'm sorry for my tears, but I'm telling you, I'll never live anything again that important and see that much in the line of miracles take place. Never. Thank you so much for everything. I wish you the best, and God bless you.